Hello everyone, I am a federated chess player of standard federating of around 1550. I am playing competitive chess since the year 2020 and that's why I exactly know how a beginner or an intermediate level player can improve themselves from such situations which are difficult, complicated. How can they improve their calculation over the board? In this channel, we are going to discuss about things more practically than just seeing the theory, which are very complex to understand. We are going to check out many things like piece placement and piece play, how each piece can be used properly on the board, how to create harmony between your pawns and pieces, and coordinate your pieces in the game. So, let's get started. Hello everyone. Today we are going to look at how piece harmony and piece coordination is way better thing to learn than just learning random opening traps from the internet or from anyone else when it comes to applying these concepts in chess. And how can we burst such traps very easily, and how these traps can backfire on the one who is trying to trap you and lead him to a very bad situation. We're going to see it practically by starting with the game and very famous trap we know, and that is, of course, the full, or you can say scholar's mate. So we start with the move e4, and then we, of course, e5 reply. This is standard opening, and now your opponent will play queen to h5. Very sneaky, attacking this f7 pawn. Next move will be bishop coming into c4, attacking the f7 pawn and threatening checkmate. But here you have to be careful because here your opponent is not only attacking the f7 pawn, it is also attacking the e5 pawn at the same time. And e5 pawn is hanging. F7 pawn is somewhat protected by the king, but e5 pawn is not protected by anything. So if you become hasty and just play the move like g6 to drive the queen away, not letting the queen stay there and keep attacking the f7 pawn, then you will fall into big trouble after queen takes on e5. And after anything blocks, let's take the queen blocks on e7 and queen takes on h8, and you lose a complete rook, and also you might lose the game. You are a complete disadvantaged situation. So we should not play like this. We should take care of our hanging pieces. That's the first rule. So in order to take care of your hanging pieces, what you should do first, develop the knight to c6 in this situation and protect the pawn on e5. So now your opponent will bring this bishop to c4, now attacking this f7 pawn, the weakest point of black, and trying to checkmate you with queen takes on f7. Now you can play the move g6, blocking this attack, not letting your opponent checkmate you. And now you are ready to develop your pieces, bishop to g7, knight to f6, etc. Now your opponent will try another trick, which is queen to f3, trying to reinforce this checkmate again on f7 with the bishop. Can you see how opponent is wasting a lot of like time and piece movement just by moving this queen around? This is what you have to take advantage of. Now we'll bring another piece into the game by moving knight to f6 and now blocking this attack from the queen on f7. And this knight is well protected by the queen, our own queen, and there is no threat whatsoever. But now your opponent can play queen to b3. This is the last trick your opponent can put on you. But now we can defend this f7 pawn. Now the threat is just to take the f7 pawn and be a pawn up. That's the idea. But now, even if we can defend this pawn with queen e7 like moves, but we have a better move. Instead of defending this pawn, we counter attack your opponent by playing knight to d4, attacking the queen. And now if your opponent takes this pawn and after king to e7, yeah, your opponent is in a tight spot because the queen is attacked and queen cannot move away from this diagonal, otherwise you lose the bishop. And if queen tries to stay in the diagonal by playing queen to c4, which is the only move, then we'll play pawn to d5. And now queen is forced to get away from the diagonal and the piece is lost. And this is how we completely get a winning position out of the scholar's mate. So this is how you counter an opening trap where you have to be careful of your hanging pieces and pawns, develop your pieces wisely and accordingly, stopping any kind of threat from your opponent, and of course, see what your opponent can create by either checking you or by threatening any checkmate or piece like captures, anything. You have to calculate. You have to be very good at calculation in such situations. So now let's take a look at another opening trap. So now we go into the Sicilian. So now we play, of course, e4, d5, knight to f3, standard, and d6. And now your opponent plays a very sneaky move, c3. You have to be careful of such sneaky moves, small pawn movements. Just see that this pawn movement to c3 not only reinforces the center, it also opens up queen to a4 like ideas, checking your king. So now you play knight to f6, attacking this pawn. Now your opponent cleverly just puts this bishop to e2, ignoring this threat. And now if you're greedy, just take this pawn in a nice way that, okay, I win a pawn. Then your opponent unleashes dynamite with queen to e4, as we discussed before. And now it's a check on your king, and plus it's also an attack on this knight at the same time. And you lose the piece, and you will be completely lost. So do not take anything your opponent offers greedily just because it's free. You have to check how your opponent can counterattack you, check your king, or take any vulnerable pieces. This knight on e4 was not protected by anything, it was completely hanging. So you cannot take that pawn right now because of the check. So now you might think, let's block the check. Why not play e to c6 and just say, now I have blocked the check, and now definitely this pawn is in danger. But now your opponent plays another tricky move, which is d4. And now if you take the pawn again, the problem is that your opponent will play d5. Pawn to d5. And now the pawn to d5 forces this knight away from this diagonal, and wherever the knight goes, again the same thing will happen. Queen to a4, check, and the piece is lost again. So we have to even be careful of threatening the defender of the tactic as well. Our diagonal, which was used for the tactic, was closed by the knight. White is expertly attacking the defender itself, and when the defender moves, attacks everything again and takes the knight. So in this situation, we have to be careful and just take this pawn. And after c takes d4, now we can play knight takes e4. And now you might think, oh no, still your opponent can play this move to d5, pawn to d5. Now our knight has to move, and then the check will come again and we lose the piece. But this time, no. You might be seeing that your opponent can check you, but also you can check your opponent. And now the difference is, after you block the check, knight takes, queen takes, queen takes with check, and knight takes. And now you can play knight to b4, threatening a fork and also threatening to take the pawn at the same time. Two pawns up advantage, and also go on to win the game in the future. So this is how you cleverly see, if your opponent tries to attack you, you also put an attack in your opponent by either checking with the queen or any pieces and see to it that it's a very valuable check. It's not a random check. You should not randomly check your opponents. You might go into trouble. Your opponent might move the piece in such a way that it develops for your opponent and you are in trouble after some time as your opponent's pieces are more developed. So be careful, threaten your opponent in the right manner, calculate in the right way, and you will be fine. Let's see at the last trap which we can counter. So we start the game with the move e4. Your opponent replies with e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and after bishop to c4, your opponent plays knight to d4. Already your opponent is breaking opening principle, which is not moving the piece twice in the opening, as you know. And here, this peak might see, oh, the knight has moved away. And now you might see, okay, the pawn is hanging as the knight was protecting the pawn before. And if you capture this pawn, thinking, okay, I'm the pawn up, and now I'm also threatening knight takes f7, winning another pawn and also forking the queen and the rook at the same time. But you will forget that queen can come to g5, and now it's also threatening the knight and this pawn at the same time. And even if you think to take and threaten the rook, now comes the concept of danger levels. And how it works, that if your opponent is attacking one of your piece, you attack on either the equal or more important piece of your opponent. And in this case, attack the rook, and also eventually will attack the king after capturing the rook, which is a stronger threat than what we are putting. Rook will come to f1, and now after queen takes on e4, which is a check, the only way to save anything is sacrificing the queen, but that will be lost anyway. And if you put bishop to e2, now we have knight to f3 and a stunning smothered checkmate. So doing this can also be painful using the missiles. You have to be very careful what your opponent is threatening you, rather than just saying what you are threatening your opponent. So instead of just greedily grabbing any pawns, we can just play knight takes a knight, and after pawn takes knight, you can see your opponent's pawns, central pawns have been doubled, and now we can just play d3, get a nice position by pushing the pawn to f4, castling first, and then getting this bishop and knight out easily, and getting a good central control. It's the bishop, knight coming into the game very quickly. While your opponent's position is not very good as none of the pieces are developed, this is how you actually play if your opponent is trying to put a trap against you. This is how you maintain peace harmony, not let anything hang. See what your opponent is threatening you. Also threaten your opponent if you have any threats which you can create of your own. Do good calculations as well during such situations. That is the advice I would give to you. So that's it for today. Bye bye.